If I hadn't heard it, I wouldn't have believed it. And if I hadn't seen the proof with my own eyes, I still wouldn't have believed it. I'm a park ranger stationed at Silver Falls State Park in Oregon, and it's probably the most beautiful of the state parks here. And that's saying something. This particular day, I was trying to catch up on my paperwork. It was ridiculously early in the morning. I think it was a Saturday. I guess I don't exactly remember the day, because everything flew out of my head the moment I saw him. This young man came running into the ranger station. He looked freaked out, and that's putting it mildly. I was at the closest desk, so I got to deal with him. As soon as he started talking, any hope I had of a normal complaint of raccoons raiding his campsite were out the window. He said that he had been truck camping the night before, up in the northern part of the park. My first instinct was to ask if he had gotten a camping permit, because I was positive he hadn't. But he honestly looked so freaked out, I thought I would just listen to him for the moment. I'd bust him for illegal camping later. At first, his story sounded normal. Young guy decides to go truck camping. Just pulling over and parking wherever he feels like it, pulling out his sleeping bag and going to sleep in the bed of his truck. That was all fine. It was what he said next that had me scratching my head. The more I listened, the weirder it got. About 4 minutes in, I offered him a cup of coffee. He looked like he needed it. For those of you who don't know, Ranger Station coffee is the next best thing to alcohol. It is so ridiculously strong and tastes ridiculously bad. When he didn't seem to care that he was drinking the equivalent of melted tire rubber, I knew he was really freaked out. It was at this point I realized that I needed to take an incident report. I pulled out the proper paperwork and I asked him to go over the story again. By this time, the coffee was probably doing its job, and he looked a little terrified. The story he repeated to me, though, was no less odd. From what I could tell, he had followed a trail deep into the forest, somewhere in one of the more remote areas of the park. Now, this was not a great idea, because the bear and bobcat population is concentrated in those remote areas. He told me that he had pulled out his sleeping bag, stretched it out in the covered bed of his truck, and gone to sleep. At some point during the night, he'd woken up, or been woken up. He'd heard something walking around outside his truck. Again, this isn't unusual. There is wildlife in that area, and some of it is going to be curious about what the big metal thing is that's parked in their backyard, especially if he had any food or been careless with his trash. I couldn't really see why hearing an animal walk around outside his truck would have been such a big deal. He said that this wasn't his first truck camping trip, and he was used to having something with fur get curious in the middle of the night. But this one time, it had been different. When I asked him what he was talking about, he said that the difference was that the animal never went away. Most of the time, when something is walking around outside of the truck, it sniffs around, maybe bumps the truck a little bit, but eventually it goes away. This thing, whatever had been out there, didn't do that. He told me that when he had been woken up, that he heard something pacing in the clearing outside the truck. It seemed to be pacing in a wide circle around his car, judging by the way the sound moved. That wasn't particularly scary. Something to be concerned about, maybe, but scary. What scared him more was when the pacing got closer and closer to the car. Given that he said whatever was walking around the truck was slow and sounded heavy, it certainly could have been a bear. Bears are smart. If they found food in one human vehicle, they'll try anything else that looks like it. It's spring, and there are a lot of hungry bears trying to eat away their winter hunger pains. But the next thing he told me made my professional antenna stand up and started sending alarm signals, because whatever was out there in that clearing decided to bump into the truck. Not once, not twice, 3 times. And just when the shaking stopped, he had heard something scraping along the sides of the truck. The way he described the sound, as a long, slow screech, and really sounded like claws. The kid was absolutely white as a sheet, and clutching his coffee cup when he described it, lying there in the pitch-black night. A thin layer of metal and small glass windows between him and whatever was out there. I'm pretty sure he was rethinking all of his life choices that led up to last night. The scraping stopped, thankfully, before he had to decide to either turn on his phone's flashlight to see what was out there. But then, the passenger side door rattled. I had asked him to clarify, just for the statement on the paperwork, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. The animal in the clearing last night had understood what a door handle was and how to use it. This was not good. At this point, I thanked him for his report, told him that he should not have camped illegally, and went to go talk to my supervisor. My supervisor declined to press charges, especially given the fact that the guy looked like he was 2 shades north of a heart attack. We did write him a citation for illegal camping, though. Afterward, my boss told me that I needed to get out to that site since I was qualified to track and dart a troublesome bear. When you have a bear that is too interested in people, or the things that people can have around them, protocol means darting them, moving them to another section of the park, and releasing them far enough away from human habitation that they're away from the temperature of an easy meal. That was what my team and I were intending to do. On the way out to the incident site, I stopped to take a quick look at the kid's truck. Wouldn't you know it, there were scratches on the side of that thing, big ones. I measured my fingers across the width of the claw span. We were not dealing with a small bear. It took us a while to get out to the area that he said he camped in. It was about midday, but the way the trees are spaced makes lighting situations a little tricky. That was concerning to me because I needed to be able to get a clear shot at this bear before it got a clear shot at us. As a matter of safety and common sense, we were also all armed with bear spray and our sidearms. The woods are thick up there by the falls, but we found his tire tracks just where he said they'd be and followed them into the clearing. It was obvious where he stopped. Tire ruts were deep in the ground. We spread out, looking for tracks, droppings, first snagged on bushes or tree branches, anything that could tell us what size or species of bear we were looking for. We already knew it wasn't a grizzly. There hadn't been any sightings in years, and honestly, a grizzly wouldn't have tried the doors. It would have just ripped the truck open to get to that kid. I sure hoped it wasn't a grizzly migrating into the area. I didn't have enough tranquilizers for that. Cortez, one of the seasoned rangers, who had been on more than one animal relocation with me, found a print sunk curiously deep in the mud. It was just a heel, though. Couldn't get any decent impressions of the rest of the foot. What we did have looked big, though, which matched what other information we had had. I was fiddling with my tranq darts when I heard a rustling in the underbrush. It wasn't anything small, that was for sure. Cortez, Manitz, and I all shifted so the wind wasn't carrying our scent to the bear, and we got ready. My adrenaline was spiking, but I breathed slow and deep to keep my hands steady. This was not a time to get the shakes like a rookie. I heard it before I saw it. That slow, deliberate pacing of something that knows nothing else is going to challenge it in these woods. Slow. Closer. This bear was not afraid of humans, and that was a bad thing for everyone concerned. If we couldn't knock it out and relocate it somewhere deeper in the park, our only option would be to put it down. The forest went quiet. Really, really quiet. Not even the crows were making their usual racket. The wind shifted, seconds before I saw a large brownish form start to breach the tree line, and I got a noseful of a truly repulsive smell. It smelled like old blood and carrion. I was in the middle of thinking, no wonder this bear tried to get into that truck. It's wounded, when it stepped out of the underbrush. It wasn't a bear. It was, I don't know what it was. I've never seen anything like it. Brownish fur, molting in places, like it was going through a spring shed. But it didn't have a broad, flat, bare head. It's crazy, but it looked like a dog, and an incredibly ugly dog. Look, I'd never be admitting this out loud, but this thing, it wasn't natural, couldn't have been. If it was, Mother Nature had been on a serious bender to make something like this. Of course, I'm joking now, but I promise you, humor was not on my mind back then, especially when the thing stood up. It was about the size of a man, but like I said, hairy and powerful, and I wasn't sure which I was more terrified of, the long claws or the evil look it was giving us. I remember hearing Cortez mutter something. I think it was a prayer. If it was, it worked, because my body took over where my brain refused to. I raised my tranquilizer rifle and fired. The pink-tipped dart hit it in the chest, and any hope that I had that it had the same body mass as a black bear died a quick death when all it did was look at me and snarl. I still see those long yellow teeth in my nightmares. Cortez and Manitz had their sidearms out and fired at it. It's always the court of the last resort because we want to protect wildlife, but at this point, I don't think any of us considered this thing wildlife. Its attention wasn't on me anymore, and I was able to reload and fire another dart at it. It lunged forward into the clearing toward me, and I knew I was going to die, except that it staggered and it went to its knees for a second, growling. The tranks must have started to work. It wasn't enough to knock it out cold right then and there. The thing spun around and bolted back the way it had come, crashing through the trees. Cortez, Manitz, and I just stood there, looking at each other. Technically, we should have gone after it. We didn't. I don't really remember getting back into our Forest Service truck. I remember having to pull off the side of the service road to throw up as the adrenaline crash hit. You often say that the events you're reading to your audience left the people who lived through them shattered. You're right, because we were. We had to decide what to do, because no one was going to believe us when we told them what we had seen. On the other hand, knowing that thing was out there meant anyone who came into the park was in danger. We told our supervisor exactly what had happened. Should I be worried that he didn't seem surprised? Concerned? Yes. Surprised? We put up signs warning visitors of a dangerous bear in the park and called Fish and Wildlife, because what else are we supposed to do? A few days later, the forest was swarming with people who had 3 initials on the back of their windbreakers. We haven't had any sightings since. After I retired, my spouse, our 2 kids, and I moved to a nice suburban area in Utah. This was a few years ago, and we really loved it there. It was peaceful, it was quiet, and everyone seems to get along and know each other in our little town. Our house was a typical suburban home, with a backyard with a white picket fence and a deck big enough to grill hot dogs and have a nice little barbecue. The deck faces the woods, and we'd often see all kinds of beautiful wildlife out there. At first, it felt like a paradise, a vision in my head that I worked toward all those years. However, a couple of months ago, things started to change. one night when my spouse woke me up in the middle of the night, saying that she heard something outside. I didn't think too much of it, got up and looked outside the window, saw nothing, and said everything was fine, and went back to sleep. The next night, the same thing happened, but this time, I heard it too, and it woke me up. We both got up and looked out the window this time, but still didn't see anything. We assumed it was just a tree branch hitting the house, or an animal or something, and we went back to bed. Then the noises continued every night around the same time. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom, and when I opened the door, I saw something moving outside. It was a tall, skinny, humanoid creature, about 6 feet tall. It had long arms and legs, and was scurrying about in a disturbing, unnatural way. The best way I can describe it is it was like Gollum from The Lord of the Rings, but very tall and lanky. Then the creature stopped and looked right at me through the window. It had these awful red glowing eyes, and it made me sick to my stomach. I grabbed my gun and ran out there, but there was no trace of it anywhere. That night, I made sure to have my gun under my pillow so I could go outside and confront this creature as soon as I heard the sound again. It was getting around that time of night, but this time, I heard a huge crash coming from the dining room. My spouse screamed, and I grabbed my gun and headed toward the living room. When I turned on the light, I saw that the creature had broken the window and was now crouched over behind the dining room table. It was peering at me, its terrifying red eyes glowing and menacing. I fired a shot at it, and I missed and hit the table. The creature froze and kept looking right into my eyes. I fired again. I missed and hit the wall behind him. The creature absolutely freaked out and let out this blood-curdling screeching sound. It jumped up on the dining room table and made its way over to the window, scratching wildly like a rabid animal would do. The creature crawled out of the window, scratching the walls and the window seal, and it cut itself pretty badly on the broken glass. There was blood everywhere, and I could see the creature running into the woods on all fours. It was so traumatizing. After the terrifying encounter with the creature, my spouse, children, and I were left in complete shock and couldn't believe what had happened. We spent the rest of the night cleaning up the broken glass and the blood that was all over the dining room. I knew that if it was going to come back, it was going to come back with a vengeance. When we finally cleaned everything up, I told everyone to try and get some sleep. Then I barricaded all the windows and doors, made sure I had my gun on me, and kept watch all night, hoping I could end this nightmare once and for all. I called the cops the next morning, and when they came over, they said it must have been some sort of animal, based on the scratches and damages to the house. When I described to them what I had seen, 6 feet tall, red eyes, tall and gangly, creepy freak, they looked at me like I was insane. They assured us a patrol car would come by to surveil the area regularly, but it was obvious that there was nothing they could do. For the next few days, we were too scared to leave the house. We stayed inside, keeping watch and waiting for the creature to come back. We slowly started to calm down and get back to our normal routine. However, we could never shake off the feeling that we were being watched, that something was always out there, waiting for us. Our kids have suffered the most from this. I assured them that they are safe and that I will protect them, but they constantly have nightmares about this creature breaking into the house in the middle of the night. I feel like a failure as a father for not being able to take that pain away from them. The creature has never returned. At least, it's never come into the house. I swear I see it poke its head out of the trees sometimes, but when I look, there's nothing there. My family has mentioned that they experience this as well. It's almost like how people describe seeing ghosts out of the corner of your eye. The encounter we had with the creature was months ago, but to all of us, it feels like it happened yesterday. I'm debating moving and relocating my family out of here. The presence of the creature remains. It's as if he's watching our every move, waiting for his perfect opportunity to try and attack us again. I've scoured the woods in hopes for clues, so I can put an end to this torture, but he is nowhere to be found, without a single trace to track him down. I spent my childhood years in a suburb in Virginia. It was really close to the heart of the DC metropolitan area. The surrounding neighborhoods were highly developed, but our suburb had a distinct quality to it. It was encircled by a very old forest. The woods would often come right up to the edge of the residential properties. Some of the houses were so enveloped by the trees that it was hard to know where one ended and the other began. There were lots of remnants of the Civil War in that area. We were always discovering trenches when we were exploring. The biggest trees were a few hundred years old, at least, and I swear, the smell of that place was ancient somehow. I was in my sophomore year of high school. Me and some of my buddies got together for a long weekend of hanging out and watching The Walking Dead, which hadn't been out long. After watching that, we would try to freak each other out. It was on a Sunday night, and we didn't have school the next day for some reason. One of my friends, Matt, suggested we explore the woods late at night. He said it was to build character or some crap. My buddy Greg and I lived in the neighborhood, and we were game to go out there. Pretty much the most dangerous thing in those woods, as far as we knew, was an occasional coyote. So sometime around 11, we grabbed some flashlights and headed into the woods to see what we could get into. Things were pretty uneventful at first. We were exchanging scaly stories we'd heard and kept trying to spook each other. We spotted a few sets of glowing animal eyes in the woods, but they didn't bother us. We saw a fox, but it ran off as soon as it spotted us. And there were these raccoons we saw climbing into a tree. It wasn't until we got to this big trench that things started to feel weird. When we reached that spot, everything had gotten really quiet. It was unnaturally still, and it seemed to have happened all of a sudden. All of the small noises just stopped. It was probably around midnight by that point. We'd covered some ground, and we were in a patch of woods that even I wasn't that familiar with. There weren't any houses in the area, and it just felt like a forgotten spot. But that trench seemed deeper than the ones that I was used to seeing, unless our flashlights made it look like that. Anyway, the mood totally changed there. At first, I thought it was just my fear of the dark kicking in. I had always been that type of kid that liked to have a lot of lights on. You wouldn't catch me going into a dark room without flipping the switch. Plus, we had just been watching The Walking Dead, but when I looked at my friends, they looked nervous too. We decided to turn back, saying that it was getting late. As we were walking back, something made me turn around to check behind us. I shined my light back toward the trench, and we saw the glimmer of eyes. But something felt wrong, really wrong. Usually, when you illuminate animals with a light source, their eyes reflect a glint of yellow or green, and most animals tend to be pretty low to the ground. But these particular eyes were situated much higher than the typical animal height, roughly 6 feet above the ground, and they were glowing an unnatural orange color. I gave an alert to my friends, and started walking faster. It wasn't until we had covered half the distance on our way back that a putrid odor hit us. The smell was like rotten decay. It was like the smell of garbage that had been sitting around for a very long time. At first, I thought it was just an area we were moving through, but it kept getting stronger. That's when I turned around and saw the eyes again. They were close, freaking close enough that I should have been able to tell what the hell kind of animal they were attached to. But it was like my mind just couldn't make sense of it. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it looked like some gigantic demonic dog or hyena or something. But dogs and hyenas aren't 6 feet tall and don't walk around on their hind legs. I don't know if I yelled or what, but my friends turned around and froze. We stood there, staring at this thing, and it was staring back at us. It had these massive shoulders and a humped back and fangs, these sharp, horrible fangs. An instant later, we turned around and started bolting back home. Problem was that this thing started running too. I was sure it was gaining on us. If we had been any farther from the house, I don't think we would have made it. My lungs were burning, and I think I was screaming. The smell was unbearable. The thing was running like some monster you'd see in your nightmares, like it was running with one leg shorter than the other. And it was making these hissing and grunting noises that were terrifying. I don't think any of us turned around once. We wouldn't have made it if we had. When we hit the clearing at the edge of the woods, I felt for the first time that I was going to survive. The smell disappeared, and the normal night noises just seemed to resume all of a sudden. I watched my friends run back into the house, and I risked a look behind me. The eyes were there, glowing, right at the edge of the woods. Then I blinked, and they were gone. My friends and I could never agree on what we saw that night. There's no way we could. It didn't fit into anyone's reality. After that, I felt even more uneasy at night, in the dark. I don't know what I saw. I still have trouble describing it.